Hello there, I'm Ben and welcome to Field and Foley episode 35. Today I'm thrilled to introduce our guest Matt Mikkelsen, a sound recordist, sound designer and documentary filmmaker based in Duluth, Minnesota. With a career dedicating to recording, researching and preserving natural soundscapes, Matt has collaborated with many big names like Skywalker Sound, Microsoft or Apple. As the executive director of Wilderness Quiet Parks for Quiet Parks International, Matt champions the cause of saving quiet for the benefit of all life. He has also worked closely with Gordon Hempton, the sound tracker, who founded Quiet Parks International. Join us as we delve into Matt's incredible journey and his mission to preserve the world's natural soundscapes. So, hello Matt, and welcome on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Ben. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for being on. I've reached out to, as we talked about before, to Gordon Hempton because I was really into all his work and just reading his book right now for a second time. And these little spots of quiet are always so hard to find, and reading his immense descriptions inspired me, so I reached out and he referred me to you as the torchbearer, so to say, as he picked up his work now. And so I'm very glad to have you on board here. And yeah, of course, the first thing I'd like to ask, Quiet Parks International, it used to be called One Square Inch of Silence. How did you come to work with Gordon? And I know you've told this story many times, but I want to just shortly have this because it's something that I also did a lot and it always works. So I'd like to encourage people to do it the same way.
Yeah, absolutely. The long story short is how I got to work with Gordon Hempton and how I, have now come to consider him my mentor and a close colleague is I just sent him an email. I was really young. I was 18 at the time at university studying sound design at a film school. And I was just feeling like I loved all the sound studies, but I felt like I wanted to do something that got me outside more, that got me into nature more, and that allowed me to work on climate conservation and ecosystem regeneration, things like this. So I found Gordon's work and like pretty much everyone who finds Gordon's work was really enthralled, really inspired. And yeah, I reached out to him and I just said, hey, what you do sounds really amazing and I'd love to learn more about it. And that started now, I think that was 12 years ago or so. And I went out to study with him in Washington State how to do nature sound recording, which for anyone who's tried it knows it's very difficult and is really its own craft of recording. So I studied with him and we just really hit it off. And that kind of started this long history of collaboration and working together on, not only, really sound specific design projects, but also on One Square Inch of Silence and now Quiet Parks International. One Square Inch of Silence was really a regional based sound conservation project that was in Olympic National Park, specifically in Washington State in the US. Working to just preserve this one tiny square inch from noise pollution. And that's a really successful project. We've had thousands and thousands of people be really highly impacted by that work. However, our kind of constant request as we were working at One Square Inch of Silence was, how can we bring this to the rest of the world? And so many years of very hard work has led us to Quiet Parks International, which is just an incredible organization. We're all volunteer, but doing some really, really, I think, important work in getting people the quiet that we all deserve.
Yeah, maybe we can talk a bit more in detail about that. And the one term that I really liked that you mentioned in one of the interviews was the auditory horizon, and it really struck a chord with me. It's amazing. So maybe you can briefly tell people what is that about and why it's important for people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we talk about the word auditory horizon, which is a really fun word, especially if you're into sound and into listening. It's essentially how far you can hear, how clear your sonic view is. When you're in a quiet place, and when I say quiet, I mean a place that's free from noise pollution, or mostly free from noise pollution, you can hear so far, miles and miles and miles away from you. And that goes away when there's noise. When we're in the cities, when we're in our towns, most of us live in, suburban or urban areas. You just can't hear that much stuff, which in itself might not seem like a big problem. But only in the past, 100 or so years have we really started being subjected to this level of noise and this amount of sound. As humans, we evolved to be able to use our ears for very primitive things. We were like used to sleeping outside and using our ears for hunting purposes and using our ears to keep us safe. Now we just kind of have this constant barrage of sound coming at us, and it's not an obscure scientific study that tells us that it's bad for our health. There are just study after study that says noise is bad for us and quiet is good for us. And that's really why we want to encourage people to go out and try and find quiet, because it's really good for you. And once you experience quiet, it quiets you. Listening to quiet on the outside quiets your inside, we like to say. Quiet is quieting. And once you experience that, you understand why it's so important to work to protect it and to try and incorporate it into your daily life. So whether that just means you take a walk into your park in your neighborhood and sit on a bench and enjoy some time listening to some birds, or if that means, loading up a backpack and going into the wilderness for 2 weeks at a time, whatever quiet kind of means to you, it's important to find that and to experience it and work to protect it, because I think it makes us all better humans.
Yeah, that's a good sentence. It makes us all better humans. Then maybe we can talk a bit about your specific role, because your role is stated on the website as Executive Director of Wilderness Quiet Parks, which is a cool title. But I'd like to hear what exactly is your role in this title. What exactly do you do? Yeah,
so as the Executive Director of Wilderness Quiet Parks, I do a lot of different things for the organization, but my main role is to kind of look at quiet as it exists in wilderness areas, look at the soundscape of wilderness areas around the world in hopes of finding these areas that are mostly free from noise pollution. To my knowledge, there's nowhere that's completely free of noise pollution. Noise exists at the farthest reaches of our planet, in the most remote areas, but we do have some places that experience less noise pollution. So we've kind of created a criteria, or a scientific standard, we like to say, about what is quiet, how much noise can exist in a place where we'll still consider it quiet. And so I kind of both personally and then also coordinate these research trips to collect auditory data about, these different ecosystems, and then analyze the data to see, okay, is this quiet? If it is quiet, I work with the land managers to say, okay, good job, this is a quiet place. Like, for example, in a national park, if we find quiet, I work with the national park staff to say, like, okay, this is a quiet place. Here's what you can do to continue to protect it. Here's what you shouldn't do. These are the threats to it. Here's how you inform your visitors about how special of a place this is. So we kind of work with in all these different aspects of the quiet experience, I'd say. And, there's a lot of different program areas at Quiet Parks International. I just run one of them. But it's really interesting work. We've also had different state parks or land managers reach out to us and say, okay, we want to see if we have quiet in our park. So I'll show up with a bunch of microphones and a bunch of equipment and essentially try and see, okay, does quiet exist in this place? That's always fun. It's like hunting without having to kill something.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And can you go into a bit more detail about what quiet means with the organizations like standards? I'm guessing it's a certain dB level of just natural noise, and for a minimum amount of time, right? Because if every hour a plane goes by, then it's not really quiet, because it's spreading out before and after that, and then
exactly. Yeah. So we have our kind of standard for the wilderness quiet is different from our standard related to our urban quiet parks program, and we have a quiet trails program, all these different things. But the wilderness quiet parks program relies much less on decibel level and more on the amount of noise pollution events. what we like to see in a wilderness quiet area is an average noise-free interval of 15 minutes or more. 15 minutes doesn't sound like that long.
I know from experience, it's very long.
Yeah, and it really is. There's a lot of people, when I tell that to them, people who are great listeners, people who love nature, love recording, and they say, 15 minutes, that's like nothing. I know all these places you can experience 15 minutes of 15 minutes free from noise pollution. And I follow those leads. And, I'd say 9.9 times out of 10, when you put, really high quality research equipment out, you are finding that the noise-free interval is a lot shorter than that. So that's kind of what we do. We take these really long recordings, sometimes 48, 72 hours or longer, and then I'll look to see what's the pattern of noise pollution in these places? How often are planes flying over? Are there any trains in the area or distant highway noise? Is there other activity like mining or like resource extraction that's contributing to the noise pollution in the area? I like to try and go back multiple times in different seasons to figure out okay, is this just a one-off and I'm here this week, but next week there's going to be, teenagers partying every day all over the place, or so yeah, it's really the Wilderness Quiet Park standard is this 15-minute noise-free interval. That should exist kind of away from what Bernie Krause will call geophony, so like the sound of water flowing, the sound of like any sort of geothermal features or these kind of consistent natural sounds. We don't want to set up our testing equipment right next to a waterfall because that'll mask the noise pollution.
Of course, yeah.
Even though it's quiet and it's really nice.
Yeah.
There's no noise pollution next to a big waterfall.
Yes, exactly, yeah. Like rushing and water and in different like configurations, different styles with different reverbs is some of my personal favorites because it's always, like you said, it masks a lot. So if you find that space, you can just sit down there and just relax into the water sounds. But yeah, it's masking. That's what it is. It masks a lot. So so you have to find a space where it's not too loud nature-wise, and then it should also be quiet and free without interruptions, so that narrows it down quite a bit, right?
Yeah, and then weather is a huge factor too. Like the wind can't be too strong because that really affects how sound travels. The way that like the atmosphere kind of stratifies is that we do these, most of the most accurate recordings happen in the very, very early morning, like pre-dawn to dawn, because the air is still, sound travels really, really well. And back to kind of this acoustic horizon theory is I've recorded sounds that are happening 10 or 15 miles away from where I am with the right conditions. And it's really difficult to achieve those kind of conditions, but you can imagine how hard it is to then find quiet. If you need a 15-mile radius around you free from noise, it just doesn't really happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. And if you if you're trying to make a place more quiet or helping like the parks or organizations or whatever, whoever is responsible for the land, how do you then work towards the mission to get that quiet in? I mean, I'm guessing one of the most important things is going to be flight patterns and stuff like that, because airplanes have such a wide reach of sonic pollution. But yeah, is this the only thing? Is it trying mainly to get helicopters and planes to fly further away from this space, or what else do you do to make that happen?
Yeah, it's really difficult to make a place that's not quiet. Pretty much I'd say all of the wilderness quiet parks are places that are already exists there, given the current circumstances with little to no like mitigation of noise. Taking a place that's already really noisy and turning it quiet is not that it's impossible, but it's just really difficult to do, I think. So we kind of start off on a good foot, I'd say.
Okay.
And from that point, we kind of identify the biggest threats to the quiet there. So increase in air traffic is a huge threat to quiet everywhere. Air traffic is like going to triple again in the next like 15 years, I think I read somewhere. Which, I hope that's an overstatement, but that's a real threat to not just like quiet places, but that's just like a threat to our sanity as humans. But we have had, and no one actually has had real success in diverting commercial air traffic around a place. That is all governed by the FAA and different governmental organizations, and their top priority is safety, and then their next priority is efficiency. So asking them to fly around the national parks doesn't, not only are they not interested in it, but it also like doesn't really make sense, because you'd have places in the United States where you'd have to like fly so far around that I understand why it's not really an option for them. So what we can do is there are certain, in certain countries, different land designations come with certain regulations. So for instance, wilderness areas in the United States usually don't allow low-flying private aircraft. So for instance, I live very close to a place called the Boundary Waters Wilderness Canoe Area in northern Minnesota. It's one of the quietest places I've ever been to. So I feel very lucky it's kind of in my backyard. Not coincidence.
Of course.
But there's no aircraft allowed to fly under, I think, 4,000 feet above the ground. You do still get commercial aircraft that fly at 30,000, 35,000 feet over, but they're not very frequent. So kind of the best way that we can protect quiet is that we've found is that we need to make people aware that quiet is important. It's a natural resource, just like clean air, clean water, and make them aware of how special it is. And then people will actively work to continue to steward that quiet. A lot of people just don't really think about it as a natural resource because we've spent so much, many of us have spent so much of our lives ignoring what our ears are telling us, because what we're hearing is not pleasant, it's not natural, it's not enjoyable. Very, very few times do I like walk around a city and not see everyone choosing to change or alter their auditory environments with noise-canceling headphones. Everyone is now wearing noise-canceling headphones. And few people are saying, oh, that's a correlation that like we don't like our acoustic surroundings, but it makes total sense. Why listen to the screeching subway and the really loud highways that you're traveling on when you can listen to your music or you can listen to a podcast in quiet? It's a much more enjoyable experience. So I'm kind of rambling, but people are unhappy with their acoustic environments for a good reason. Getting them to recognize the power of listening and the power of quiet, I think, is really crucial to our mission. And we'll do everything that we can to get people to recognize that, like, yeah, this is a beautiful, valuable, and important resource for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. It's like, with me, it also has started with the whole recording obsession, I would say, that I started to realize how quiet, natural quiet can be, and how, just like you said, like if you spend a certain amount of time in a quiet environment, and for me, at least in my area, that's mostly time-based, so sometimes at night at a certain spot in the forest, I don't have any traffic noises, or I don't have plane noises, and then you really adjust to the kind of noise floor. And then when a car drives by, you realize how loud it is and how like disturbing it is to the whole feeling you get. And I think that has sensitized myself to it. And so, yeah, getting people to understand how important it is probably one of the most important things we can do right now, because, yeah, just like you said, we're not used to it. I mean, I guess probably 99% of the people right now have lived all their life in places where there was noise pollution all the time. Even if you're far out on the countryside, then you have all these machineries and stuff like that for agriculture, and you always have planes flying around. So, yeah, if you're not one of the very lucky ones that, I don't know, does frequent hikes into parks, just like the places you mentioned, like the very silent, quiet nature places, then you don't really have a reference for it. And yeah, then one thing that interests me in that regard is how can we educate people on that? I mean, maybe something, of course, with the better technology we have now, noise-canceling headphones, you can do some sort of like virtual walks in the forest and stuff like that to really get the people into the mood, and then maybe play an airplane to let them realize how much of a difference that is. Is it also something you do, or is it something you're planning on doing these educational works as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, people don't, they can't save what they don't know. And that is not only a metaphor for like, yes, noise and sound, but also just for our environment in general. I think maybe this is getting like a little philosophical for like a sound-based podcast, but like we are so disconnected to our environment as a species. And we're seeing the effects of that play out with climate change, with, the degradation of our ecosystems. The more we can connect with nature, with our environment, the easier it is for us to try and save it. And the clearer it becomes how we can try and save it. So we, try and do a lot of education around not only the importance of quiet and listening, but just the importance of connecting with the world around you, I think. Because once you start to do that, it becomes a lot more evident what we need to do. We need to make some pretty serious changes here in how we're moving about our world if we want to continue having nice, prosperous lives as a species. So yeah, we do a lot of education work, and one of the things that's very apparent in this work is that accessing quiet, the way that like I'm able to access quiet, is a privilege. It's not something that everyone can do. In fact, it's something that most people cannot do. If you have a normal job, you work 9 to 5 or something like this. And you work in a suburban or urban area, taking the time to get out to a park, to do a hike, to have the knowledge to know how to do a hike like that, to have the equipment to be able to safely do a hike like this, is a privilege. And so the people who need quiet most are often unable to access it because of lots of socioeconomic factors. So that's a really big part of our work too, is recognizing that like quiet has become a privilege, that if you have enough resources, if you have enough money and time and equipment, or, just in general resources, you can access quiet. But the people who are being most impacted by noise, so the people who need quiet most are unable to access it, which is why we have this Urban Quiet Parks program, which is, I think, just some of the most impactful work that we do is in the urban quiet park space, led by a good colleague of ours, Ulf Bowman, who lives up in Sweden. And he's been recognizing and doing research on quiet places in urban areas now for a long time. And yeah, we should all be able to like go to our neighborhood park and like take a deep breath and enjoy some bird song. Regardless of where we live, regardless of how much money we make, regardless of what we do for work or anything. So I think it's important to recognize that, like, yeah, it's not so easy to just like load up a backpack and go camping for the night, I get so used to it because it's a big part of my work. But it really is a huge privilege that most people can't afford and don't have the resources to do.
Yeah. Indeed, and if people around the world are wanting to help out with the project, just like me, for example, I will go out to our local parks and try to see what I can find and what I can hear. How should we go about it? Is there some kind of like guidance on the website where it's like, hey, if you want to check out how quiet your park is, do these things? Asking, of course, for me.
Yeah, absolutely. At Quiet Parks, we're all volunteers. So even all of our directors, we're all just unpaid volunteers because we care about quiet so much. So anyone who cares about quiet that wants to help, come on in. We need help. We love meeting other people who care about quiet. It's as simple as sending us an email. We kind of have a contact form on our website, obviously, but we also have a nominate a park form. So if you have a park near you that you think is quiet, we kind of keep a database going of all these potential parks. And then we also have a map where we have started to populate data into all the different urban and wilderness quiet parks that we've gotten nominations for, or if we have data for. So just reach out. We need as much help as we can get. And once you kind of, each park is so different. Like there's not a super, at least for wilderness quiet parks, there's not a really standardized like kind of set of tools to say like, okay, go to your park, set up this equipment, record for this long. It kind of, each one is a bit tailored to fit. So if you're interested in doing wilderness quiet park recording, like send me an email, matt@quietparks.org. Let's talk about where you want to record, and I'll kind of give you my thoughts on like, where's the best place to set up? How long should you record for? Here's kind of tips and tricks to give you the best kind of session possible for data collection. And then we just kind of go from there. And if it's promising, then maybe we contact the park and we say, hey, we think that there might be quiet here. Can we conduct some formal research? Or, each place is just so different. So we like to individualize that approach. But anyone who wants to hang out and talk about quiet and talk about sound, you don't have to be a sound recordist. You don't have to be someone who's even done recording before or know about sound. If you care about quiet and you like nature, you can reach out and we can help you.
That's wonderful to hear. Yeah, and I'll definitely reach out.
Yeah, you have my info anytime you want.
Yeah. Absolutely. And yeah, going a bit more into your background again, what led you to focus firstly on recording, and especially like the natural recording and preserving those soundscapes? Because before you reached out to Gordon, you must have had an interest, because you just don't hear about a person like Gordon just out of the blue, right?
Yeah, for sure. I was a musician and wanted to be a professional musician. Like many people who end up with a job in audio engineering or sound design, a lot of us have a music background. I was mostly a drummer, and throughout like I really worked super hard to be a professional drummer. Through my preteen years, teenage years, like I trained, I went to, school. I was really, really working towards that as a dream. And as that started to come to fruition, I think I kind of realized that like, I don't want to be a professional musician. It was really fun. I really enjoyed it. I love music. Music is like just one of the most beautiful things we have on the planet. Like how lucky are we? We get to live on a planet that has music in it. But I just don't think I actually had the chops. I think I realized I wasn't good enough to make it to the level where it wouldn't be a bummer of a lifestyle,
Yeah.
Because I saw that happening to friends of mine who were just naturally more talented than I was. And they were like spending their lives like playing bars on Tuesday nights, and struggling with it. And so as I had, kind of started to learn more about the craft of playing drums, I had also started to learn about recording music, and loved that. So by the time I was like probably 14 or 15, I had a pretty good foundational knowledge of how to run sound at shows and how to set up speakers, and really loved that side of the work. So when I decided, okay, I don't think I want to play drums in a rock band, I was like, okay, maybe I'll go to school to be an audio engineer. And I think I realized pretty quickly I didn't want to work in like a music studio. I liked recording music. I don't like always working with musicians. I love like microphone placement and microphone technique. I think it's like the thing I'm really, really good at. But dealing with the creation, like the producing of music, is just something I was never super good at. And it's a really big pond to swim in. Like there are hundreds of thousands of engineers who can record the crap out of a band really, really well. So it's really hard to stick out in that industry. It's hard to, you gotta blood, sweat, and tears your way into a good engineer spot for a big studio. So anyway, I got more into the film world. I thought, podcasting was at the time not as popular as it is now, but starting to become more popular. Like now podcast is such a ubiquitous format. Back, 15 years ago, there were podcasts, but it wasn't like what it is now. But we started to see that growth. So I just thought, okay, learning more about the film, television, and radio side of things is interesting to me. So my degree is in sound design for film, television, and radio, technically. And yeah, I just, like I said before, I loved kind of building worlds for people to hear. Like taking a scene of whether it was film or a TV show or if it was radio or a podcast and building a world that people got to exist in sonically was just like so magical, you know, and very similar to the magic of playing music. You're like taking silence as your canvas and you're like building something for someone to experience. And that was just so cool. But I wanted to spend more time outside. I wanted to I was really lucky to grow up with parents who loved being outside. So we would go backpacking and hiking and canoeing and kayaking like all the time. And I just wanted that to be a part of my day to day. I didn't want that to just be for like special times when I had vacation. I wanted to be outside all the time, and I wanted to work to, fight climate change and try and restore our environment. And yes, someone actually, as I was having this exact conversation with someone, this was my first year at university. She was a senior at the time. She was, last year at university. She said, "Oh, I just heard this really cool podcast about this guy who does like nature sound recording or something. Let me find it." And she sent me the link for it. And that's when I first heard about Gordon, and his work was through his NPR podcast On Being. And that's what started me down the path of of wanting to record nature sounds, because after talking with Gordon, I decided to go out to Washington State to study with him for a week or so. And after that week, I was like just instantly hooked. Like this, I just felt like I had found my calling. I was like, this is the coolest shit that I've ever experienced, recording sound outside. I had never really even thought about it before, but recording sound outside was like the coolest thing that had ever happened to me. And I was like, I'm going to do anything I can to like make this a part of my world. Even if I have to like wash dishes every day just so I can like get outside and record at some point as a hobby, I'll do it. Like, I don't care. But having a mentor like Gordon has certainly helped me realize my dreams of not having to wash dishes and being able to record sounds.
Yeah, that's very good to hear. That's very, very good to hear. And also, I mean, as you mentioned, you started as a mentor, or you started with working with Gordon, and he was like a mentor to you. So, what interests me is like when you started out, what did you learn from him? I'm guessing, of course, how to record outside, what kind of tips and tricks. But I'm guessing also probably something that's not really obvious, right?
Yeah. I love retelling this story. It brings like such a beautiful memory back into my mind, which was, I showed up at Gordon Hempton's house. Like Gordon Hempton is a rock star in our industry. People have opinions, whatever, but he is like well known as just one of the best at what he does. So I show up at Gordon Hempton's house to take like a field recording workshop with him. And I am just like Gordon is such a, he's a beautiful soul. Like he's just so nice, so down to earth, so grounding. So he had like no ego or anything. It was really shocking, but he was like, "All right, let's like go for a hike, let's go for a walk." And I'm like, okay. So I'm like ready to like start placing microphones and like think about how we're going to record this thing. We didn't even bring microphones. He's like, the first step to being a good recordist is being a good listener. And so many people bypass that step. I can give you $20,000 of microphones and the nicest locations and all this stuff, but you're not going to record good sound unless you can be a good listener. And like any art form, music, painting, poetry, it doesn't come from like out in the world, like that the world influences how you feel, and how you feel inside, then your art takes shape. So similar to recording, you need to be able to listen, and a good recording comes from the heart. It doesn't come from your brain. And so we went on this hike, and we like pass over this little stream. It's like a tiny little stream that's kind of coming down the hillside. And he said, "Okay, like get into it." I'm was like, what? He's like, put your head like right next to the stream. And I like put my head down, I crouch down next to the stream thinking, okay, like this is what he wants. He's like, no. Like put your head right next to the stream. Like put your ear right there. And I remember for like 30 minutes, he was like pointing little things out or like asking me questions about how things sounded with my ears like right next to the stream. And that's when I noticed that like, oh my God, a stream is like, it's not the sound of a stream. It's the sound of like a million different little things being orchestrated at once to create this experience. And you can like position yourself to pick out those little things or to orient yourself more to that. So we did a lot of that kind of stuff, just listening. No microphones, no gear, just experience the place. Feel what it is to be a listener. And that's the most valuable part about being around someone like Gordon is he is a listener, and he knows he's good at listening, but he, like meditation, like any sort of practice, like you just need to keep trying to be better at it. And so that's like when I am teaching people as well, because I do some mentoring and things like this. That's the first step. It's like, what is it to be a listener? And how do you try and listen better? We can all only try to be better at listening, but the better you are at listening, the better you'll be at recording, the better you'll be at art, the better you'll be at being a human. So that was the kind of the big emphasis on training with Gordon, and still is. It's about that. And when him and I go out and record together, whether it's for projects, whether it's for fun, the gear is not very important. What's important is the time that we're in this space, occupying it as a human. What are we feeling? He kept saying to me, don't think, feel. Don't think, feel. And that is something it's like my mantra when I'm recording. It's like sometimes I get, and we all get when we're, if you work in this field of sound design or you record or you're a musician, we all get in our heads so much because there's so much we have to keep track of. Deadlines, equipment, like it is a scientific thing. All of us are like, and we are engineers. We know how to manipulate very specific equipment in a certain way to receive an outcome. But to make good art, don't think, feel. And I love that. It's been so valuable to me as I've like continued to work in this world. Is like, forget what you're thinking and like feel a bit more. And that's really helpful.
That really is a wonderful story, and it resonates a lot with me, of course, because as I mentioned before, like streams and rushing, flowing water is something that is always so fun to me. And that what you mentioned, like it's a million different sounds that together make the stream sound is something that I really like, and I'm gonna steal that sentence from you for other people, because that's exactly, I mean, I did kind of a similar thing in the beginning, but I've then used like my microphone without recording and placed it in different spaces where my head couldn't fit to hear how, like, I don't know, little caves would resonate with water flowing over it and stuff like that. And I would like play around, like, a little stream is like a playground. It's like a kid's playground. You have so many different areas and angles. And then, of course, you can do without kind of equipment. You have like hydrophones you could put underwater, or you can put something far away, or you can space it out to have a wide stereo image of stuff like that. And playing around with those kinds of things is so fun to me. And yeah, oftentimes it's more about what kind of feeling do I want to have? What do I want to capture? And sometimes the most, I don't know, mundane kind of little stream has some kind of air pocket somewhere that sounds just so amazing.
Yes.
Like I've never heard before. It's like this kind of rushing water I've never heard before. Yeah. And I've had this moment in my life, I think, 20, 50 times, I don't know how many times, and it keeps happening. So like every time I see a new water source, it's like, oh, what's the good spot here?
Yeah.
Where does it sound amazing? And it's always something
that.
different. Yeah.
I think it's also what separates, one of the things that separates a good sound recordist from an okay sound recordist is how you record a stream or a waterfall, because it's an easy target. They exist everywhere. Yeah. Noise isn't as big of an issue. It's really difficult to nail a good stream or a good river or a good waterfall. Really, really hard. And yeah, I love what you're saying, like finding just those little nooks and crannies, that seem like they might be out of the way or away from the main sound source. That's where the magic is happening. And like designing, if you are designing a river or a stream or something, it's really fun to do that as well. It's just like find these like, these individual pieces that when they come together make something more beautiful. But yeah, I could spend days recording just streams and be totally happy. Be totally
absolutely.
happy.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I see we have the same passion there. A little extra nerdy niche.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's something like, as I'm working in video game audio, and that's something that really irks me. It also irks me, of course, in movies, but I know it's like you have to understand dialogue. But something like if you have like exploration-heavy video games and you walk around in like a big Skyrim or whatever else you have, like an open-world RPG, and you walk towards a waterfall, and it's this, like you still can hear people talking, like you're standing right next to a waterfall. It should be roaring. It should be overpowering everything. It should feel like a force of nature. And also, it shouldn't be the one recording that just gets louder and quieter, because just like you said, depending on where you stand, it sounds different. And there might be other air pockets and other sounds. So that's something that I always strive for, to make it, as involved as possible, to make it at least imposing and feel like the real thing. Because waterfalls are so loud in nature. Like they can be so loud. And then you have these cool things that in winter, if you have the ice over there, you could sometimes hear like tingling bell sounds from the resonance of the ice and stuff like that. It's also good. And I think, the technology is not at all there yet to make something like this really nice.
Yeah.
And I always love when I then experience a movie or a game that captures kind of a snapshot of that essence, and you get this short feeling of, oh, that's an amazing waterfall, or that's an amazing nature place. And you really know that people have been probably scouting a spot for weeks and trying to find the right sounds to capture that kind of feeling.
Yeah.
And that's something that's absolutely motivates me.
Totally. Yeah, and I think you touch on like a really important point, is that like a lot of sound designers don't know what nature sounds like. And that's okay. Again, like we said before, like not everyone can get into nature. But I think that there's like certain, every sound designer would benefit, especially if they're working in these exploration heavy video games or in film that have a lot of nature scenes. Or again, even if the film takes place completely like in New York City, like go to New York City, hear what it sounds like. Even if you live there, take a walk, like walk around and just listen. And I find that there is this, sometimes this disconnect, like sound designers, it seems like when I'm observing content, whether I'm watching a movie or something like this, like there seems to be a disconnect. It's like, wait, you didn't listen to the place. And accuracy shouldn't be the only desire, as sound designers, it's our job to like evoke emotion, like and tell a story. So that's one of my biggest, hurdles. It's something I struggle with a lot in my sound design work, is that like not every environment has to be accurate. But because I'm a listener and I'm a listener first, that's what I strive for in my work. Mm-hmm. So not to say that everyone needs to do that, but yeah, I think like you said, there's some kind of obvious things that if you're trying to make something realistic, like if you want your video game to have realistic nature scenes, you need to go listen to nature. Leave the microphones at home. Go listen, see what you experience, see what you feel. But yeah, it was like a few years ago. I hadn't played video games in a really long time. Since I was like a teenager. I'd just been busy and at school and things like this. And a few years ago, I was like, oh, well, a lot of my clients are buying sounds for video games. And I haven't played a video game in 15 years. I'm going to buy a console and start playing video games. And I think like the first game I played was one of the big titles. It was like maybe Red Dead 2 or something like that. And I shit my pants. I was like, this is crazy. Like how far games have progressed in such a short amount of time, and the sound in them too. And I was like, I had them hooked up. I had the system hooked up in my studio. So I was like listening in a calibrated environment. Yeah. And yes, there are like lots of things. I was like, oh, well, like that's super compressed, or like that's not accurate or whatever. But it was such an incredible experience. that I'm like so excited that game designers are putting more emphasis on sound than they used to. Like, I think there, of course, are times where you can tell that sound has kind of been an afterthought, but these really good games, these big, releases that do really well, people crave good sound design because they understand that's what sets a mediocre game apart from a really good game. And so, yeah, it's really, I love talking to sound designers who are working in game because for me, what you guys do is black magic. It's like, I actually don't really understand how it works, even though I work with you all so much. It's so much fun, and it's so rewarding to hear like my work end up in a game, and it's designed well. It's like, it's so cool.
That's good. We can have a chat about that at some point if you want, because like I love chatting about it, of
Oh
course.
my
because
God.
there's so many things you can do now to make everything dynamic, and that's the thing that really excites me. Because if you have something, just like you said, like a big title, but also the small titles, the indie games that understand that sound on an emotional level has so much power.
Yes.
And that can make the game stand out and feel better, is so good. Like. And those, as I said, like those dynamic systems just for RPGs, if you can do stuff like time of day or nature or weather and connect that to different sounds and have different animals just come out at different daytimes, nighttimes or weather, that already makes so much of a difference because players are playing these games for like 40, 60, 100 hours and they might like after 30 or 40 hours first realize, I was there at night and it rained and all the frogs were croaking and I've never heard frogs before. It's so cool, this little detail.
Yeah.
And all those things take a lot of effort, but are well worth it.
Absolutely.
For the immersion of it.
I think more game designers are realizing that having field recordists on their team of people is like such a good value to have.
Yeah.
You can buy all the sound libraries, you can have access to all the sound subscriptions, but when you can work with a field recordist to record sounds for your game, it takes it to just like the next level. It really does. And I know a few good colleagues of mine in the field recording world have done work like that before. And the results have just been amazing. So I always encourage game designers to and even sound designers who work on games who aren't field recordists, like contact someone who's into field recording because what you end up getting is so special and so tailored to fit your game that it's amazing to hear. It's so cool. And I will definitely take you up on like separately from the podcast. I would love if we can just show me your world and I'll show you mine, but like
Absolutely.
I really have such an admiration for what game designers do, and I again, it's like hard for me to understand exactly how the nuts and bolts come together in a lot of ways. Even with all my experiences. So
and for me, I wanna go out more in nature for like a longer time hiking and like really spending some nights there on my own in a tent. So any tips you can give me there, like we do a trade. That's fine.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and speaking of going out in nature, like can you maybe speak about some of the rarest or most fascinating natural sounds you've recorded that come to mind?
Oh boy, there's a lot.
Of course.
And it's so funny. It's a question I get asked all the time, and I always feel like I have different answers for it. It's a question I love.
That's good.
But and I have like a 48 terabyte hard drive on my desk full of sound recordings that I've taken. And every day I could find new favorite recordings on there. Some of like the most rewarding sounds that I've recorded, I have this one coyote recording that's really, really special to me. It took me like 2 weeks to get. It was like negative 20 degrees Fahrenheit in Yellowstone National Park. I had spent like 2 weeks tracking this coyote pack and setting up and trying to record them, and got a lot of beautiful recordings of coyotes, but I wanted I had a vision of this coyote recording that was like a solo coyote, and then have the pack of coyotes start singing afterwards. And Gordon has this one coyote recording that is like the most incredible shit you've ever heard. And I remember the first time I met him, he played me this recording, and I was like, oh my God, that's it was just so inspiring to me. So like 7 years later, I got my Coyote recording in 8-channel. You know, we haven't said much on the podcast, but I record pretty much exclusively now with the Shepso RTF 3D. It's kind of like been my shtick for a while. People love it. A lot of people love it. Some people kind of hate on it, which is fine. But anyway, it was like an investment I made early on in 2018. Kind of took out a loan to buy this microphone because I was like, I think this is going to be the thing. So anyway, but yes, my Coyote recording is really special to me. Also, side note, I can give you all these sounds if you want to play them on the podcast. I have so much sound.
That would be amazing.
Please,
I always love having them in. Yes.
Yep. So yeah, I have that really amazing Coyote recording, which was just like, yeah, it was so gratifying to get. I felt so lucky and really honored. And the Coyote like starts singing like maybe like 50 feet away from the microphone. And it was the end of like an 8-hour recording session where it was just crickets the whole time, nothing happening. And right as I took a step towards the microphone to go pick it up, I was standing maybe like a quarter mile away, but I could still see it. And I like took a step towards the microphone to go pack it up, and that's when the Coyotes started. So I just stood there like frozen for like 10 minutes, waiting. So that was really beautiful. I've done a lot of thunder recording as well, which is I think it's the most difficult recording to do, to get a good thunderstorm recording. With no noise pollution, no wind, no rain, just thunder, that dry thunder. I take a trip every year, mostly with a good friend of mine who's an amazing field recordist. Her name's Laura Giannoni. And we go out every year to Colorado to record these thunderstorms. And so nailing a good thunderstorm is like last year we had, after like 2 weeks of just like grueling field recording, we hit a really good thunderstorm, and we both like nearly started crying. It was just so gratifying. And then I have some really interesting sound recordings. Like I have a recording of me pretty much getting hit by lightning on one of these recording trips. Yep. And yeah, there was a storm approaching. I had set up the recorder or the microphone. And the storm was still pretty distant at the time. So I was just kind of hanging out, getting ready to record the storm. There was some distant thunder. And then out of nowhere, it's a specific type of lightning that can come out of the top of the cloud and strike like within, a large area around the storm. And it hit a tree that was like right next to me. So I didn't get directly struck, but I came as close as you can get. And I got knocked on the ground. Feel it, right? Yeah, I got knocked on the ground. I could smell burning. I couldn't hear anything because it was so loud. Like it made me temporarily deaf. My vision got all messed up because it was so bright. But it's knowing that I'm okay, it's a really funny sound recording.
Awesome.
And because I run after the lightning hits, I run to the microphone and I'm just like, I'm yelling and cursing. I'm like, oh my God, holy crap. Like, and you hear me like pack up the microphone and stuff. I didn't even stop recording. I just threw it in my truck. But yeah, there are a lot of special moments. Also, it's kind of like, it's really interesting now. I have more than a decade of field recordings that I have accumulated. And for the most part, you could pull up any recording I've ever done and play it for me. And blindly, I'd be able to tell you probably where it's from and when it's from. And even more, I could tell you like what I was feeling at the time, or like even like maybe what I ate for breakfast. Like it's a really weird memory trigger for me. And I don't have a great memory. It's like I'm not known to have the best memory, but sound recording is a way of like almost documenting moments in your life. And it's been really special. So I have a ton of sound. Like I could give you so much stuff that you might want to include. So I'm happy to send you a folder and you can put whatever you want in the podcast. And I've
amazing.
been so lucky to be able to record the places I've recorded. And like, I have been to the Amazon jungle to record. I've been in the jungles of Costa Rica. I've been out on the prairie. I've been in the desert. I've been just some amazing, amazing places. So I feel like I want people to hear this stuff so badly, because it's been so life-changing for me to be able to hear it. So if I can share that with anyone, I want to share it.
That's wonderful. Thank you. I'll be happy to take you on, and I would like to have the recording of you almost getting struck by a lightning for the outro. That would be nice to have a bit of cursing for the outro.
Yeah, I don't know how much cursing is allowed on your podcast, but
everything.
Okay,
My podcast is
I'll
free
certainly
for all, so
hit the limit.
Yeah, that's fine. Perfect. So listeners, beware. Yeah, and maybe one other question, like, how do you approach recording in such challenging environments? Like, is it something... I've recently spoke with Thomas Rex Beverly, which you probably also know.
Oh, yeah.
Who does amazing, crazy
Oh,
things.
my
with, like,
God.
zip lining over open glaciers and stuff like that. And do you do a lot of preparation and scouting out places before, or is it more of an experimental, like, I'm visiting this place, listening a lot, and then seeing what I maybe bring on the second trip or stuff like that?
It's a little bit of both. Tom is an inspiration. I love Tom. Such a good guy. He just produces some incredible work. So I feel honored that I'd be able to talk to someone who's also talking to Tom. I think there's a lot of research that goes and planning that goes into a big trip before you get there. Because it takes a lot of resources and a lot of time to get out to these places. And most of us, I think, I don't want to speak for everyone, but a lot of the professional field recordists I know is like, we plan these things like expeditions. It's not like we're just traveling and then like happening to pick up stuff along the way, which sometimes happens, and that is a great way to do it, but we kind of have like finite budgets and time constraints that we need to stay within. So there's a lot of research that goes into these trips beforehand. And it usually starts with, for me at least, saying like, okay, this is the kind of sound that I want to capture, or this is the library I'm working on. So my most recent library is it's called Tropical, but it includes Amazon and Costa Rica, because I wanted tropical jungles. And so it's like, okay, I want to do a tropical jungle sound library. Where are the best tropical jungles for recording? And then you kind of narrow down. You're like, okay, well, here's a great jungle for recording, potentially, and here's how to get to that jungle. Okay, but that's just one jungle. Like, to make a good sound library that might have 120, 150 files in it that are all pristine and good and different, you need to go to a lot of different places and have a lot of different opportunities. So there's a lot of research and planning that goes into it beforehand. And then even still, sometimes you show up to a place and it's not what you expected, or it won't work, or something like that. You know, like for this Costa Rica trip that I was on this winter, I was with two other sound recordists, and, we'd ask the manager of like we stayed at some research stations, we stayed at some eco lodges. We'd ask, like, do you guys have a generator that you run? How do you get your power? Is there any sound, like, what kind of sounds do you hear that aren't natural? Do you hear a highway? Do you, like, have a lot of planes flying over? Like, we try and ask people these questions.
Yeah.
But most of the time, these aren't field recordists, so they don't have, the kind of, like, listening experience that we do. So sometimes you show up to a place that you're sure is going to be quiet, and you have every reason to think that'll be quiet, and it's not. And then you have to pivot and figure out what to do. And then there are times, like, I've really extensively recorded the United States. I think almost as extensively as Gordon has. And, like, what you see of Gordon's collections is like a tiny fraction of what he's actually recorded. And I'd say similarly for me is... I have my collections, and they're big. They're big collections. They're really exhaustive, but it's only a tiny fraction of what I've recorded. And my trips around the United States are a bit more meandering and a bit more just kind of like, it's me. I have all of my gear. I have all of my camping equipment. and I just drive around the country for sometimes like my longest. I lived in a van recording exclusively for about 2.5 years, just driving around recording. And now I no longer have the van because I don't want to live in a car anymore. But I still go out. I'll load up my car and I'll be gone for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And I don't know where I'm sleeping that night. I'm just driving to whatever opportunities arise and kind of figure out what it sounds like. But that's the kind of thing you can do when you're in a country you're familiar with, in a country you feel relatively safe in a country you speak the language. I couldn't do that in Ecuador very comfortably. It's a different environment. So yeah, there's a lot of just logistical concerns that kind of go into these trips. And it's a lot less about gear for the most part. At least at this point in my career, I'm really comfortable with the equipment. I know what I want to bring. I know how to set it up. I know how to troubleshoot it. I know how to bring backups for it. And because I record a lot of ORTF 3D, it's kind of like that's my system. So I kind of know like that's my main system that I'm bringing. And I bring lots of other systems with me as well. But you become more and more comfortable with the gear where it's more of an extension of you. That's how it should feel. Same thing if you play guitar. Like you want to be at the level, if you want to create something beautiful and magical, like you want to be at the level where you're not thinking about the guitar as something separate from you that you have to manipulate. It's just kind of happening. So similar to the recording gear, it's like I'm not thinking that actively about like, oh, like I have 8 channels and here's the directionality and here's the gain staging and here's the positioning, blah, blah, blah. It's kind of just happening free flow once I'm in the location. And that's important, kind of similar to what we were talking about before, is that once you get to your location, then you know it's good. Let go of the logistics. Let go of the gear. Like the gear isn't really even that important. People spend a lot of time thinking about the equipment and what am I going to buy? What do I need? What do I need to buy? What would I buy if I had the money? Some of the best sound recordings I've ever heard have come from an iPhone, have come from a Zoom H1, have come from, little handheld recorders. It's not about like, yes, I have a $20,000 microphone that I record with most of the time. That's not what makes me a good sound recordist. I think what makes me a good sound recordist is trying to open myself up to listening. And sometimes I'm good at it and sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I'm really bad at it. Actually, most of the time you're bad at it, but if you do it enough, then the 1% of the time you're good at it, you'll end up with something good. And I think that's the thing that, folks like Tom, folks like George Vlad, and folks like Andy Martin, these people who I think are really, really good at field recording. What I think people don't see, and people like Gordon, what the average sound designer doesn't understand is how many hours of recording these people do to get the one good 10-minute chunk.
Nugget. Sieving the nuggets out.
It's so much work, so much time, so much effort, so little sleep, so little food. So it's really like when I hear, George Vlad, who I'm sure you're familiar with, when I hear him.
Absolutely.
When I hear his recordings of some crazy monkey in the Congo or whatever, I know how much blood and sweat and time went into that recording. And take like your wildest imagination and multiply it by 100, because it's just it's an incredible feat that any of us end up with usable sound recordings.
Absolutely. And there's still the chance that you go out, record something and it's totally unusable. And I just recently had the experience that I'd like to share, because people also always tell me like, oh, you have so much experience now with field recording and it must be amazing and stuff like that. And I recently went out, set up my gear, checked my levels, and heard it on the headphones, and it sounded amazing. And I forgot my bug spray, so I recorded for 15 minutes and then I went home because I was stung. Just to realize I've recorded the most quiet, somber ambience there is. I just recorded 15 minutes of silence because my headphone mix was different than the recording mix. And it was such a stupid mistake because I tried the setting out like weeks earlier and I kept the equipment and didn't think about it. So yeah, 1.7 gigabytes of recording of total silence and ambisonics.
Perfect.
Amazing. Yeah, perfect.
Just what everyone wants. There you go. Now you can retire.
Yeah.
That
It's
is
the perfect recording.
a perfect example of stuff that happens to us all the time. Like the number of times I've been out, like really far out, and been like, oh my God, my SD card is full and I don't have an extra. Like, how am I 5 miles from my car, from the rest of my gear, and I don't have an extra SD card? Those are mistakes you usually only make one time.
Yes.
You know, or like
it's different kind of mistakes. You make
or like, oh, I
different kind
grabbed
of
the
mistakes.
wrong battery, and this battery's actually empty, and I need to change batteries. You know, like those are mistakes that you have to make. You only make them once.
Yes, exactly.
And then once you make them once, you don't make the same mistake, but you end up making
you make different ones.
different mistakes.
And it's totally fine. I mean, you just have to let go, laugh about it, because it's always fun to share those kinds of stories.
It is. And being able to kind of, laugh about it and learn from that experience is important. Exactly. But yeah, I think it's one of these things too, and I know like lots of field recordists experience this, is like you get approached by a potential client. The client is like, okay, we want this, that, and the other thing. And you give them a price to go out and record those things. And they say, oh, that's too expensive. We'll like have someone do it in-house. And I'm like, all good. Sounds like a plan. Let me know how that goes. Not passive aggressively, but really like, let me know how it goes. And most of the time, if they have budget, they'll come back and they'll say, yeah, that didn't work. Because even getting a simple stream or what people think of as a simple stream recording, it's not as easy as taking some microphones out and taking a recording of a stream. It takes a lot more effort, a lot more time, and a lot more skill. So yeah, the number of times people make these little silly mistakes, the more mistakes you make like that, the better you end up being at the craft.
Yeah, I like to say learning by failing, because that's the way you do.
How else are we supposed to learn,
Exactly. And you have to try to like really embrace failure, because every time you make a mistake and you realize it, you just can say to yourself, I now learned something and I've like have a step up from my knowledge. So it's always a good thing. And if you can get your mind to think of that as a good thing, that makes you a more happy person.
Yeah. I feel like there's also this, I was in the Amazon jungle, like really deep in the Amazon jungle on a field recording expedition with Gordon Hempton, with like a star cast of folks, and recording mostly ORTF 3D. And about maybe 2 days before we were supposed to leave, I started feeling this like crunch, like, oh man, like I gotta keep recording, like there's no time for sleep, there's no time for eating, like it's time to go and soak this all up. And I started getting problems. Like I had one of my channels was really freaking out and just kind of sounded like someone was jiggling a broken cable, just shorting out and sounding all weird. And then it switched to another channel and then another channel. I was like, oh my God, like the humidity has gotten to the Sheps capsules. This is like something that happens every once in a while. And so I started like kind of freaking out. I was like, oh my God, I got to dry this thing out. And I was doing everything I knew how to dry the system out. I had to dry it out. It was a humidity problem. And for like a full probably 12 hours, I was just like, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't do anything other than try and dry out the microphone, which if you've ever been to a place like the Amazon jungle, drying anything is not a possibility. And it took me a really long time to realize like, oh, it's a cable issue. It was actually one of my cables that was on the fritz, and I had to bypass one of these cables anyway. But what I learned was like, I just spent one of my last days in the Amazon jungle, a place I might only get to once in my life, worrying about this dumb microphone, And at that point, I just was like, honestly, like maybe I shouldn't even record anymore on this trip. Like,
just enjoy.
Maybe I should just be here, be present in this place. And so what I ended up doing was I did do I was like, okay, I'll do 12 more hours of like really intense, just nonstop recording. And then my last day here, I'll leave the microphone set up somewhere, but I'm just going to be here and be in this place. And let's not forget why we love nature sound recording. It's because we get to be in nature and we get to listen. So let's be in nature and let's listen. And so that's really important too. When you forget your battery, when you end up recording, silence, or when your microphone is fritzing out, like try and do your best to like take a breath and just enjoy where you are.
Yeah. Exactly. You're still out in nature having a great time.
Exactly. Yeah. Even on the worst of days, you're still, you still get to be outside. You still get to be there to listen.
Yeah.
And so that's a valuable lesson that I've learned. Probably one of the most valuable lessons is like be thankful and be present. It's not all about what you're extracting,
Yeah. That would have been like a wonderful last answer, but unfortunately I have one more question for you because I asked that question all my guests and I want to hear your answer as well. And that is my question: what is the first sound you ever recorded and why did you record it?
Oh my God, that's a great question. The first sound I ever recorded. I mean, the first sound I ever recorded is probably like when I was playing music and we were trying to record an EP or something. I'm not going to count that because it's not that important in the overall scheme of things. The first time I really I think recorded nature intentionally and felt like I was uncovering something really important for me personally was in those when I was with Gordon for this first kind of trip that I made out to study with him. And it's funny to hear him tell this story because him and I tell it a bit differently, but he kind of, after maybe on one of our last days together, he kind of handed me a set, his A-B set of Sennheiser MKH-20s. And he was like, okay, go, do whatever you want. Like, just take the microphones and go out without me and enjoy, like figure out, just go record some sound if you want. And so, of course, I'm like, here I am. I'm like holding Gordon Hempton's really nice microphone system. And I'm like traipsing through the woods. And I ended up finding these ravens, this like roost of ravens, this family of ravens that were, I think they were just like doing their raven thing. They sounded like ravens, but I got so enthralled with how they sounded and all the different vocalizations they were making and the way that their vocalizations were echoing through the forest that I was in. And then I got really interested in how the reverberations were happening. So that was then my target, was like not the actual call. Like I don't really care about it happening. I care about what's happening after the fact. And so then I just, for hours, was recording the reverberations of the ravens. And that was the first time I think I'd felt that, like, what some people call like that flow state where you like lose track of time, you lose track of your hunger or thirst or having to go to the bathroom. I was just in that moment for so long. And when Gordon tells the story, he says that he thought that I like ran away with his gear because I was gone for so long. And that's then wonderful. He says I came back and I was like covered in mud and like just like looked like I had been through the ringer, but with like the biggest, happiest smile on my face. And that's still how I feel every time I come back from not just recording, but just from like from listening really intentionally. Is just like this sense of joy and relief. So I think ravens. I'm going to say ravens are probably the first thing I really intentionally recorded. It's not awesome. It's not an inherently sexy sound, but it's great. It's what like it meant.
The reverberations is always fun. Like having those kind of natural reverberations are always
oh my
so
gosh.
Interesting.
Yeah, one of my other favorite sounds, now that I'm thinking about it from your question earlier, is loons. Like I don't know if you're familiar with the sound of loons. It's a pretty iconic sound. We have a lot of them here in northern Minnesota. And I have some loon recordings that I just like, when I listen to it, I'm like, I can't believe, one, that I recorded this, and two, that there's no reverb put on it. Like, I didn't add anything. This is a dry recording, but the reverb tail is like, 10 or 15 seconds long as it echoes around the lake and through the forest. And that's such a beautiful part of nature sound recording. It's not like recording the bird sing. It's recording the echo of the bird singing afterwards. That's when it really gets magical.
Absolutely, the presence in space.
Yep.
So yeah, unfortunately we're all out of time, but thank you so much again for being on the show, and we'll have a talk soon, of course, about other stuff. So yeah, thank you so much for all the stories, and yeah, for the listeners, please enjoy getting hit by a lightning as an outro.
Thanks so much for having me, Ben. I really appreciate it.
Oh shit! Woo!
Oh my God.
Looking for more audio-related podcasts to listen to? We're part of the Audio Podcast Alliance, featuring a hand-picked selection of the very best podcasts about sound. Be sure to hear the latest episodes from our friends in the community at audiopodcast.org. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider supporting on patreon.com/fieldandfoley or ko-fi.com/fieldandfoley, where you gain early access to episodes in lossless format and can submit questions for our guests. Thank you for listening.